Have you ever been told, just get out of your own way? Well, I have. But today, we're going to learn exactly how we can do exactly that. So stay tuned. I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about opening possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you have options from which to choose, including when you've been told to just get out of your own way. My guest today is Joanna Hardis. She's a licensed independent social worker, a cognitive behavioral therapist, and an executive coach. She specializes in anxiety, OCD, and life transitions. That's a great list of things that she works on, given what I see in the world today. And she is also the author of Just Do Nothing, a paradoxical guide to getting out of your own way. So without further ado, Joanna, welcome to Unlocked.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Well, I want to tell you, I just want to get into this.
Great. I'm excited.
Good. In your book,
Mhm.
you talk about toxic positive vibes. What are they? And why do you find them to be so repugnant?
Oh, sure. Well, okay, let me preface it. I'm not against positivity. I'm not against feeling good. But I am against cliches, and I am against the toxic positive vibes are the things like good vibes only and
Yeah.
look on the bright side and only positive emotions. And I think, at best, they're cliches, but at worst, they're encouraging people to only feel, certain emotions and really and there's a whole lot of other emotions that are very normal that people experience and need to learn how to feel and how to experience. But when we are told that we should only be feeling a certain way, it really sends the wrong message.
I so appreciate that. You know, there are so many things in this world where you're right. There are other emotions that are perfectly legitimate. When we lose somebody, we need time to grieve, plain and simple.
Yes, right.
I mean, and that's the most obvious one, but there's lots of others where we're allowed to be angry. It's how you express it, of course, that one wants to think about. But that's
Yes.
a legitimate emotion. So thank you for that extra thing of moving past the fact that we have to be positive all the time. But
Sure.
I'm sorry, you're going to say something?
Well, and I think I agree with you. And I think the other thing is, it's often because the person who is saying that kind of message is so uncomfortable with feeling it themselves. It
Oh,
invalidates the other person's experience incredibly. But it's also because the person who is saying it is probably uncomfortable
mm,
with the kind of emotion the person is experiencing.
ah, great insight. Well, speaking of insights, you have a book, and I'm
You.
really anxious for you to talk about that book. You know, what's the excuse me, why is it important to take the time now to do that? Tell us about that book.
Oh my gosh. Well, so in the book, it has a catchy title that Just Do Nothing.
Well,
But
let's show it to everybody.
oh, look at that. There it is. But the important part of the book and the really the nuts and bolts is the subtitle, which is the paradoxical guide for getting out of your way. Because and I think this may resonate a lot with your audience. People are used to doing more. They're used to working harder to achieve more. They're used to studying more to get in where they want to go. They're used to doing more to get more, which works really, really well if the problem is what we say outside of your head. However, when the problem is inside your head, and by that I mean one's thoughts, feelings, sensations, we actually want to do less. So, doing more when we're feeling more works against us. So, for instance, if you're worried about something and you worry more, I bet you have been in this situation. I certainly have. When has that ever helped anybody?
Yeah.
To worry more or overthink something more or ruminate more or try to figure something out for the 30th time.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Well, I know there's a lot that we're going to talk about as we continue on and get more into the detail of the book. But I have to tell you,
Yes.
I'm really curious. Did you ever see yourself doing what you do today when you were a kid?
Being a therapist or an author?
Me either, both.
I probably saw myself being a therapist.
Ah,
Probably, I never saw myself as an author. It just never occurred to
mhm.
me, although I've been encouraged to do it. But certainly being a therapist, it wouldn't have surprised me that I ended up here, although I never intended to be a therapist. Um, but yeah, certainly being an author, no.
Oh, gosh. I'm curious though. What was it that you saw from your childhood that says, okay, this is consistent that I'm now a therapist? What were the signals, do you think?
I think curiosity about people.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in what makes people tick.
Yeah.
And that has been a through line since adolescence. So, working with people who are in distress,
Mm.
who are in really intense situations. Ever since high school, I won a fellowship to work for independent study, and I chose to work with people with HIV. And this was in the 80s when it was different than it is
Big,
today.
big issue. Yep.
Yes. So through college, when I was a rape crisis volunteer, all through college, I've always been drawn to working with people in very intense situations and really trying to figure out how to partner with someone to help them move forward.
You know, I think of all the people I've interviewed, you have the closest relationship between what you saw in your early life and what you're doing today. So I want to congratulate you that you have this wonderful through line. It's fabulous.
Wow. I mean, who knows how I mean, I don't know that. I mean, I went to college pre-med and I knew
But
that
still,
wasn't the
that's
right
helping
fit.
people. Yes.
And I think I just fell into social work, which is what my master's is in, but it ended up being the right fit for me.
Great. Great. Well, one of the most frequent comments to those I coach is that I say to them, never confuse comfort with safety. You show people how to respond to being uncomfortable by giving them the knowledge and the tools they need to move forward. What's the most important part of your book? I mean, because I think this message alone is dynamite. Because given from my own work, I know that people when they're uncomfortable do crazy things, and you really want to get them to the point where they really say, "This is okay. It's uncomfortable, but." So
Mhm.
let me pass the ball to you.
Mhm. Oh my gosh. So the most important part, well, certainly what you're describing is a big part of the book, which is learning how to do what we call the while. So I can feel anxious while I ask for a promotion.
Uh-huh.
I can feel unsettled while I do whatever the behavior is. And because what you're describing is when someone uses how they feel to guide their behavior, it's called, in my field, it's called emotional reasoning. And you're entirely correct. That is exactly what we don't want people to do, because often it's what keeps people stuck.
Mm.
So much of the book is learning how to let those uncomfortable and unpleasant feelings be, not engage with them. That's what the do nothing is about.
Ah,
Does that make sense? Does that?
yes, it does.
Yeah.
It says to me, "Hey, just accept that, but
Yes.
and don't let it get in your way."
Yes.
I mean, it's sort of like, you get a cut. Well, you have to accept the fact you're gonna have a scab for a while and just go on with life. So,
Yes. Yes.
I like that.
Exactly. But people need to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
Because I think you and I probably both know that people want to change, they want to get out of their way, but it's those feelings that get in people's way, that stop them cold in their tracks. So they have to learn how to let them be, because that's not an easy thing for people to do.
Mm, it's true. I I don't mean for us to move away from this, but I wanna just bring another dimension in
Sure.
because I want us to talk about the word "nothing." Because what some of the things you say is just do nothing and accept while, etcetera. There's there's a great line from the movie Eat, Pray, Love, and it
Mhm.
goes, "Dolce far niente," the sweetness of doing nothing. How do you manage to do nothing?
How do I manage to do nothing, or how do I help people to do
Either
nothing?
way, either way.
Well, I know for myself, I have to schedule nothing time.
Yeah, I never
S
thought about scheduling it, but you're right, because then it would even make it easier for me. I'm a person who loves activity. I
Mhm,
move constantly, and so
mhm.
doing nothing when I'll never forget when I watched that movie, Dolce far niente. How could I possibly sit on the floor and do nothing?
Right, right.
So scheduling it. Okay,
So
good.
so I make sure at every weekend that I carve out time where I have absolutely no plans. And it may be for a couple hours, it may be for an hour, it may be for a whole night if I get lucky, and I have no agenda. So just to see what actually emerges that I want to do. Now, during my day, I also have time where in between clients or in between what I do, where I may have 5-10 minutes that I intentionally do nothing and I just work on breath. But I think, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about this. For many people, especially those with whom I work, doing nothing is the scariest thing,
Yes.
because people don't like to be, what they say, they always say to me, I don't want to be alone with my thoughts.
Interesting. Interesting that someone would not want to be alone with their thoughts. Yeah. No, I take that back. I was going to say I don't understand that, but I do understand that because sometimes there'll be an event that really bothers you, and you'll play that event over and over again in your mind. So that would be something that I know for myself. I wouldn't want to be alone with my thoughts. Excellent,
Hmm.
excellent insight. Hmm.
Or if you're feeling, I know sometimes for me, if I'm feeling all stirred up about something, and
Mhm.
generally it's just, I can stir myself up about nothing often, as a mom. um, that time, that time where I don't have activity to distract me, I have to work. I have to use the skills that I lay out in my book, the same skills that I teach people, to interact and respond differently to the stuff in my head, or else I can really get myself in a tizzy about, what my kids are doing because I haven't heard from them, and all sorts of imaginative things that I can imagine happening.
Hmm. So, what are some of the things that you mention in your book to help people in those times when they really should be doing nothing uh, to deal with the discomfort we talked about earlier?
Sure. Well, I have so many. So every chapter, at the end of every chapter, there's a mental fitness skill, because
Mm.
I approach our mental health much like physical health, that we need skills, and I consider it mental fitness that build on each other. So, one of the important ones that I teach early on is noticing the difference between having a thought, which is just a spontaneous event in our heads, and thinking. Thinking is a behavior. It's what we do when we engage in a thought.
Oh, you have to say more about that.
Okay. So, and I encourage people, and in the book, that they set a timer for 5 minutes and they do nothing. And some people will call it silent meditation, but that turns a lot of people off. So I just say set a timer and notice. So you may have a thought that pops up. What am I going to have for lunch? That is passive. It pops up. Your brain just spits it up. Thinking is engaging in that. Well, I had turkey yesterday and tuna salad sounds kind of good. And I
Mm.
wonder, do I have rye bread? I don't know if I have rye bread. And do I have pickles? Like, engagement with the thought is thinking. That's a behavior. We have control over that behavior.
Thank you for that explanation. This is really funny because I tell my clients too, every day you should spend at least 5 minutes in silence. I call it in silence.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
like you, I don't mention meditation or anything like that because people want to use that time for themselves. But I say it's got to be a silence, not necessarily outward silence, but get this as quiet as you can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And people need to learn how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
But
so,
your comments about the difference between thoughts and thinking is very helpful to me because I do get thoughts during that 5 minutes.
of
But
course,
but if I don't engage with it, the thought may drift away and another thought comes in. So that I think is what you're trying to say. Just
exactly. Exactly.
mm,
Yes.
beautiful. Beautiful. It's funny when I do that, I get so many ideas for blogs.
Hmm. Hmm.
I often come to the end of the 5 minutes, I better write this down so I remember it.
Exactly. Right.
Ah, well, there's another dimension in your book, and you talk about practice and repetition. What is it about us humans that we need to do things over and over again in order to make a shift happen?
Sure. Well, I think um, it's I mean, for me and the lens by which I view things, it's the brain. The brain needs new learning. Especially, we cannot unlearn associations and old patterns, but we can create new learning. And so, in order to do that, we need to practice the new behavior. We need a lot of repetition in order to create that new pathway, in order to strengthen it, in order for it to compete literally with the old one, and eventually to inhibit the old learning.
I like that it inhibits it because I
Yes.
can understand that. I once wrote a blog called Stop Trying to Change Bad Habits. And it was all about, just as you said, create a new habit. But I love this fact that you really have to do it and do it and do it and do it. so that it inhibits that bad habit. I like that use of that word, that introduction
Yes.
of that word, inhibit. Yeah.
Yes. It's called, in my field, it's called inhibitory learning.
Ah, I love learning new terms.
Oh,
Inhibitory
good. Oh, this is
learning.
why we're good for each other. Yes.
Yes.
Because we can't unlearn. That's not how the brain works.
Right.
And so we need to create a new one, but it has to be strong enough
Yeah.
to inhibit the old, or else the brain's just going to do. That's how the brain works. It's predictive based on old patterns, what it's always done.
Yeah. Yes, because it likes to be efficient.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Yeah, because it's work to think about things.
Right. Right. And I think that's what people don't appreciate. And that's also, what I have a problem with when people make change sound so easy, because the brain can do it, but it does take a lot of work in order to get it to do it.
What are some exercises you suggest to people that to really to practice so that they really can practice better?
Sure. Well, another one, and I think this goes back a little bit to what we were saying about feelings and when people's feelings get in the way of things. One of the skills that I present in the book is called urge surfing. I did not come up with a name, or riding the wave. So, an emotion is like a wave, it peaks and it passes. And an emotion only lasts 90 seconds,
Mm,
which shocks people
yeah.
when they say, well, I've been worrying about this for hours, or, my whole vacation was ruined because I was stressed out about the cat at home or something. Well, that is because we keep re-triggering the circuitry. So it's very important to learn how to ride a wave and leave the feeling alone. Now, so what I present in the book is this idea of scaling too. And like, if we take a scale of 1 to 10, obviously anything 8 or above are the really, really, really hard things in our lives, for which we're not going to start there because we're outside of our window of tolerance. So, what I want people to do in the book is we want to practice these skills with like ones and twos, which is very low
Yeah.
distress.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I take it down so micro. Let's practice it with itches, like itches like that. So, again, here's our 5 minutes that we're going to set the timer, and commit to getting itchy or uncomfortable. So in that 5 minutes, I guarantee someone is going to they're going to have itches, they're going to want to change position. That's an urge, and that's something that, if we focus on the sensation, it's going to get bigger. So what I want people to do is, can they allow the feeling to be there, allow the itch to be there, but broaden their awareness to whatever else is going on in their immediate environment. So, what else do you see? What else do you hear? What else do you feel underneath you? And notice what happens to the itch.
This is fascinating. I'm sitting here and right now my nose is itching.
Of course. So my head is itching. Of course, that's what happens.
So but that's an example of how you practice. Yes? Is that what you mean?
Yes, so that is very, very low distress. And people will
Ah,
say,
yes, that's right. Low.
low distress. And then once you get the mechanics of it down, then you figure out, okay, well, how can I do a little bit more distress? So perhaps then you get a notification on your phone. So many people with whom I work have to immediately check.
Yep.
So can they resist that urge to check and go 20 minutes or 15 minutes? They're riding out a feeling. They're allowing a feeling to be there. And then, we gradually go building higher, adding on more distress or more uncomfortable situations. You want a snack, but you're in the middle of writing an email. Can you put that urge for a snack in the background? Ride out the urge, because chances are what's driving it is not true hunger, it's boredom or frustration or something else. Can you ride that out and continue with your email?
Wow, you really touched on something that I had never thought of before, which is
Oh,
that
really?
that's right, that it comes out of boredom. Wow. I think I'm going to be thinking about my urges now in relationship. Okay, Madeline, is there something boring you? Because I have a tendency to become bored. Yeah, this is great. Thank
Oh,
you.
good. Yes. It's, another one of the things that readers or listeners can think about is, which gets to what you're speaking of. What is the function of my behavior?
Mm.
Because all behaviors have functions and consequences. And so if we think about, okay, well, why am I going for the snack or something? If we take that example,
Mhm, mhm.
is it hunger or is it something else? Oftentimes, if people can step back and not be so reactive, they may see, oh, I'm bored,
Hmm.
or I'm frustrated, or I'm anxious.
And in that stepping back, they begin to understand those things, but it also allows them to sit in that discomfort that we talked about earlier because they're doing something in it,
Yes,
the
right,
while that you
right.
talked about.
Yes.
Mm.
They're allowing it. They're not reacting to it, which is what we really want to get away from, because we don't want to react to our emotions. We want to respond to a situation. But we have to slow down and we have to step back when that happens.
Mm. Nice. I can see this. I can see this being very valuable to parents when you're working, when you're observing your children. Um, when they're in a situation where they might fall or they might bump into something or something that you would prefer that they not do because they're going to cry afterwards. And yet that taking it, as you say, while feeling that, allowing the child to do it, because it may be exactly what the child needs to do to fall and learn to pick themselves up by themselves. This is fascinating, Joanna.
Absolutely. You have absolutely identified what's so crucial in parenting. And what can be so difficult for parents is their own distress. We call it distress intolerance. But that the belief that they can't handle their own feelings of feeling anxious or whatever they may feel, and so then they act to get rid of it.
Mm, wow. And I'm thinking here, sitting here thinking, how many times have we subverted the learning that that was happening for your child? Uh,
Yes, it,
because
and it
that,
can be really subtle. It can,
yes.
it can be so subtle.
I remember one time I was watching a father and a son. They were playing on the floor, and the child was putting balls in spaces. Okay, and there were colors, etc. And I saw the father get just a little anxious, and so he reached over and he took the red ball and he put it into the red slot. And the child looked at it and began rearranging all the balls so they'd fit in the right colors. And I thought, oh dear, he's just taught his child silently through his own distress. And the
You're
child,
right.
limited what
Yes.
he learned.
Yes, it is so true. I found myself here. I just wrote a whole book on distress intolerance, and last week, and I have I have kids in their 20s. My youngest is 17, but it was my eldest's birthday last week, and she was turning 23.
Congratulations to her.
Thank you. Very proud. Thank you. But my own distress about her siblings forgetting her birthday, and that would hurt her feelings. So I had the urge to text my son who's in Colorado and remind him. And I thought, Joanna, what are you like? What are you doing? He is an adult. If he is going to forget, that is on him and
Yeah,
their relationship.
yeah,
But it was subtle. I
yeah,
mean, but it was all because I was so worried.
yeah. You know, another thought comes to my mind, or example, I should say. I'm thinking as a leader, you may have a young person on your team who's developing, and and it's almost time for them to do a small presentation, say in a meeting. I can imagine, and I can think back even to myself. When did I hold that staff member back because I was concerned rather than allow that person to step out and see their own strength by giving that presentation themselves? So I think this is another area where your advice about doing nothing and sitting while you are discomforted.
Sure. Yeah, I
Important.
think that's really important because you also don't know if they're going to sink or swim.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so and I imagine that can feel really uncomfortable.
It does, I can tell you.
I believe it. Yes,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And when they succeed, then you just feel exultant. I mean, truly, because it's just wonderful. You've nurtured this person along, and they've really done it. Of course, the catch is if they do falter, then you've got to have a plan so that you can step in and
Sure.
ameliorate that and mitigate the damage. But nonetheless, they have to have those opportunities, and you have to give them those opportunities, even when it's
Right.
risky for
Right.
you as well as them. Yeah,
Yes. And let's hope that they've had those opportunities up till now, that someone has allowed them to fail with boundaries and with limits so that they know how to do distress differently in case it happens.
definitely. Well, there's another way that we can get through distress or whatever while feeling uncomfortable. And that's to have a really strong support, social support. I know I talk a lot about in resilience. Make sure you have social support because that's critical to you when you're in those moments when you're trying to get through something. So I'm wondering, how does it relate to your work?
I agree with you. It's essential to have community, to have a community of people, whether it doesn't matter where the community is formed, but to support the change, to help the person prepare for the change, to support the change, I think is essential, whether it's family, whether it's colleagues, whether it's mentorship,
Mhm.
whether it really doesn't matter, but I believe we can't do this work alone. We don't exist in a vacuum. We can't do it alone. And so it's essential.
Mm, absolutely. One of one of the things I often say to people is just every day reach out to someone you know and just maintain that relationship because you never know when they're the person who's going to give you that that same outreach step and help you.
It's
Ah,
great advice. It's great advice.
ah. Well, I'm also curious about how we can take more of what you've been talking about, which is so powerful. How can we bring this into the work environment? You work with people in transition. I think transitions are really important, especially today, where I mean, let's just look at the initial impact of AI to so many in so many industries. That means there are going to be transitions going on. What are some things people can do to really prepare themselves for that? You talked about the 1 to 10, but what else can they do?
Well, and I can't speak, to specific situations because I'm not knowledgeable enough about them,
Mhm.
but I think it's always important to be centered in what we know to be true versus the what ifs.
Mm.
Because I think, especially in times of transition, I think people who are prone to anxiety tend to live in the what if and the worst case scenario that may never happen. I think it's important to recognize that transition can also be a time of growth. Growth is exciting, growth is uncomfortable. And so again, not taking how we feel as a measure of what we should or shouldn't do, but keeping it also in, what we know to be true. So just because we know something is emerging doesn't mean that you're going to lose your job. Sure, it could happen, but I work with a lot of people that live in the possibility that, well, because this might happen, it's going to happen.
How do you work with people who have that tendency? I mean, it's a habit. It's a bad habit, where you always see the negative side. How do you help them find ways to move to a more positive outlook, an
Well,
alternative outlook, even
or a more neutral, I think. Well,
neutral?
and the brain is designed to be negative. There's a negativity bias. So I think the first thing is just to validate that, their brains are doing brain things. However, it's important for them to recognize in what way is it serving them, in what way is it not serving them. Because the person has to buy into working on shifting what they're noticing. And so oftentimes the buying into the negative, the brain may just be saying, hey, this is a possibility, but the person is believing it.
Mm. Oh, that comes back to your point of center into what you know to be true.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. And so, what I do in my work with people is very much first, we have to understand how the brain works. So it's very important for people to understand, look, your brain has certain biases that contribute to why you are the way that you are. So it's important for people to understand why they're the way they are. And that sets the stage for, okay, given all of that, now this is how we can start to respond differently. So you can notice that message that pops up in your head that may be more negatively streamed. It doesn't mean that it's true. So if you can step back from it and slow down enough, you can say, is this actually true? Do I have anything in my experience to support this?
Mhm.
If not, do I need to just let that thought be and move, engage in a behavior that's going to move me toward where I want to go?
As you were talking, I was beginning to think of some of my own situations. For example, I have this show. That means I have to get ready for it and make sure that the guest is lined up and knows what they need to do, and I have all the technical stuff in hand. And sometimes I can let myself worry about it all week long. And I had a long discussion with myself, and I said, "You don't have to worry about this. You have time between on Fridays, because you open that day up. There's your day. That's when you prepare for next week." And it's really helped. But I had to really get myself in hand and say, "You don't have to worry about it all the time."
Yes. What you're speaking to, Madeline, is we can choose what thoughts we pay attention to, and we can choose where we pay attention,
Mm.
where we place our attention and what we pay
Mhm.
attention to.
Mhm.
And where we focus our attention, that is going to get stronger and grow because we are signaling to the brain. This may be more brain stuff than anyone cares about, but we are signaling then to the brain that this is important. So the brain marks it and says, oh, I better be vigilant to this. So if we're worrying all week about something, that is sending a lot of messaging to the brain about something that may not go wrong.
But we do have to focus on the brain because that's really where so much of this is happening.
I agree with you. I know. I agree with you, but it's probably, I don't know
I
how much people
appreciate
get
that.
interested, but I agree
Mm.
with you.
I'm beginning to see more and more why you use the word paradoxical about, it's paradoxical to do nothing in order to solve problems. Thank you for that.
Good. Yes. Yes. I mean, that really is the crux of the work. Anytime we're working with things internally in our head, it really is the less effort that we can expend, oftentimes the better.
Mm.
And we want to focus on behaviors that move us in the direction we want to go.
Mm. Well, I'm just thinking about all the things that I have learned. The first is your phrase, while I mean, that's just a simple way to remind yourself, okay, I'm uncomfortable right now. While I am this uncomfortable, I can, whatever, or it just has shifted my whole perception of that moment. And, and then you talked about inhibiting learning.
Mm-hmm.
Great. We do get in the way of learning. And this urge surfing, I love this. There's a book by Joan Rosenberg, and she talks about how we can change our emotions in 90 seconds. And I wondered where she got the 90 seconds. Now I know.
Well, that's Taylor. Jill. I can't think of the person's name, but yes. It's 90 seconds.
It's actually very, what's the right word? It's very reassuring to me that I don't have to worry about this emotion taking over, because if I just stop, it's going to go away in 90 seconds.
Yes, if we can let it be, if
Yeah.
we can just do nothing with it,
Yeah.
it will pass.
Yeah. Oh, and this other thing that I learned was the difference between a thought and thinking, which is engaging with the thought. That's a great lesson for me. So I want to thank you for that. Well, my audience is mostly between the ages of like 25 and 50. And this is such a great time in your life because you're building your career, you're working it, and you're full of energy and excitement for the world. So what are some things that you would recommend to them? I mean, we talked about a lot of stuff, but maybe just a few things that they could do on a daily basis, weekly basis, a moment basis.
Sure. And we touched on it, but I can't emphasize it enough, which is carving out time, be it 5 minutes. But I really believe it has to be daily, where you have some kind of practice to to practice responding differently to the stuff in our heads. I think it's so important to have that time, because it's sort of like going to the gym. That time is our time in the gym where we're really learning the mechanics of how to respond differently, which then it gives us the more preparation for when the stressors and the distractions get bigger. And
Okay.
I just think it's so foundational to my work with people and to really good mental health, is learning how to respond differently to what's in our heads.
Learn to respond differently to what's in our heads. And I loved your example of starting with something very, very minor, like an
Yes.
itch,
Yes.
and learning
Yes.
and saying, oh, well, I can do that, and moving on to the next. Great. Great. Yeah, I have to say, I have so enjoyed our conversation. I've learned so many things, and I've read about this stuff. But
Oh my
still,
gosh,
I'm learning.
wonderful. Me too.
Yeah, it's just been wonderful. And your point about we choose where we pay our attention, because that's one of my messages about resilience. Resilience is really all about a choice. That when you're hit with something, you have a moment to choose how you want to respond. And it's preparing for that moment that you have to make that choice. So I just love how our work just works together.
It does so beautifully.
Oh, gosh. Well, Joanna Hardis, thank you so much. I wonder if you have any final comments that you want to say to our audience before we close.
I think just my final comment to people is to remember the paradoxical nature of things. It is so important that when you're feeling more, the urge is to do more, but what we really want to do is to do less. For people that are so used to doing more, their solutions become the problems. So the solutions of overthinking and worrying and ruminating and figuring it out, those become our problems. And what we need to do is learn how to accept them, how to allow them, how to just do nothing with them so we can do the behavior that matters to us.
Mm, beautiful advice. Again, I just so appreciate this time together. And thank you for being my guest here on Unlocked.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity.
You are so welcome. Ah, gosh. I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed that conversation. But I guess you've probably figured that out by now. Well, now we're at that place in the show where I talk about a book that has had impact on me. And I can tell you that Joanna's is already having an impact just talking to her. And I'm still reading her book, so there'll be more. But here's one for this week. When you hear the words once upon a time, you know that you're going to be told a fairy tale, right? Well, oftentimes that people will just sort of dismiss it because, oh, that's childish. Other people will say, well, it's probably a good story. I'll just listen to the story, and they engage in it. I was that person who said it's childish and moved on. But for those who actually listen to the tale, the story begins to reveal things to them, even to discover things about themselves. And I have to admit, I've kind of shifted into this other camp where today I'm one of those who really listens because fairy tales create environments, small little spaces where you can do amazing things. I mean, you can even slay a dragon in a fairy tale. You can discover something about yourself, maybe a strength that you didn't know. Anyway, I'm so enamored with the form that I often will create a fairy tale when I'm working with my clients. And I create a fairy tale that sort of looks like the situation they're in, but casts it in a land far, far away so that they can explore the problem safely, where even though there are dragons, they know they have the capacity to slay them. It's really fun to watch people really engage in the story, in this, what I call the fairy tale, learn the lessons and let their understanding really blossom. Now, the question is, why did I finally become this way? And that's because I read a book by Bruno Bettelheim called The Uses of Enchantment, The Meaning and Importance of Fairy Tales. It's a wonderful book, but there was a particular lesson that I took from it. And that was that a fairy tale is really a moment. It's a tale that captures the attention of the listener. And then it delivers a message of encouragement and empowerment. Fairy tales can teach a child, for example, that they might have the solution within their own bodies. I mean, in the fairy tale about Rapunzel, she drops her big braid down, and the prince is able to climb up her braid. Well, it's within her own body that she saves the day, so to speak. A fairy tale might be about bullies, but in the fairy tale, Jack and the Beanstalk, there's initiative, there's the capacity to deal with it. So each of these offers lessons that prepare the child for adulthood. Now, so why am I dealing with fairy tales still, even in my business and my work with clients? Because in the end, what I want to do is open their thinking to create that little space of time and moment when they can explore their own problems safely. One last word about fairy tales. Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in Wonderland, said of, of fairy tales that they are a love gift to the child because you're preparing them for adulthood. And Bettelheim says that's a good way. It's a good way to distinguish whether something is just a story or whether it's a fairy tale. Is it a love gift to a child? Well, as I said, this is the book that opened my eyes to the power of a fairy tale, not just stories, but fairy tales. And actually, I have written several fairy tales. One is called The Kingdom of Leek, which I presented at the Smithsonian several years ago. It has a lot of lessons in it. People talked about it and discovered them as they talked about it. But I've also created other fairy tales that really help people deal with problems more immediate. I've used them in workshops, for example, to help people understand what it means to actually solve a problem, not just treat the symptoms. So that's my book for this week. Bruno Bettelheim's The Uses of Enchantment. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I hope that you enjoyed the conversation. And I would like to explore a challenge with you if you have one. You can arrange for a 30-minute free consultation with me. Just send me an email to madelyn@madelynblair.com, and we'll set something up. And if you've learned something today, I hope you'll make a comment about it on social media. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to click the like button. Better yet, subscribe. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.